programmers, my name is Alex Louie. Today we're going to talk about the while loop. This is our second loop that we're talking about in our installment of 3 loops. The initial loop that I spoke about in the previous video was the do while, which is a post-test loop. This loop is actually a pre-test loop in addition to the for loop, which we'll cover in the next video. I've written a little program here to demonstrate how the while loop actually works, and we can go over it. Here in my declaration section, I've declared a couple of variables, and I'll explain what each one does. So this program is actually going to add on interest to our balance, and if we get to a certain required amount, we will break out and stop adding interest to our balance. Okay, so the required amount is 5,000 here. Then we declare a balance variable that will keep a running count of our balance, and then our interest variable, which will keep a running count of our interest that we've added on. And lastly, we have an initial deposit, which is what the user will type in as his initial deposit. We prompt the user to enter initial deposit, and we initialize our balance to that initial deposit. While our balance is less than or equal to a required amount. So how does a while loop actually work? And I can teach you what the syntax is right now. So the while loop has a keyword called while, and it'll have an open parentheses and a close parentheses, and within these parentheses you're going to have your Boolean expression. Inside this expression, you should have an expression that will either return a true or a false. Always has to return a true or a false. If it returns a true, then it will execute our body of the loop once. Okay. Once you execute the body of the loop, it's going to go back and do a check on our expression again. If our expression is true, then we will execute the body of this loop once more. If our expression ever goes to false, meaning that this evaluates to false, then it will break out of this loop and go into the next C++ statement line. Okay. So in this particular example, if I enter my balance and anything less than or equal to the required amount, so let's say I enter $100. If I enter $100, it's going to do compare. Is 100, which is the value of my balance, less than or equal to required amount? Required amount would be what I've initialized it here to 5,000. In this particular case, it's true, right? If it's true, then we will execute the body of this loop. And what does this body do? Well, it takes the balance amount and it multiplies it by the interest rate. Interest rate is a constant variable that I've declared that you see up here of double data type, and I've set it to 0.05. So for this particular example, our interest rate is 5%, which is pretty good. Okay, 5%, that's our interest for one iteration, and then we're going to add on our interest to our original balance. Okay, lastly, what the program will do is it will take account of our interest, okay, and it will also give you a balance, your final balance. Okay, it will give you a final balance. Now, and this will be the final balance and the final interest that you got. It won't give you the the interest, because the final balance will be the interest of the previous balance, right, times the interest rate. Okay, so let's go through this program. So if I compile and run, let's say we enter initial deposit of 200. So when I enter 200, okay, then this while loop will iterate until this is false. Okay, so it starts at 200 and then it goes through each iteration. So if I press enter, okay, it's going to do the calculations, and then finally it will say, okay, my final interest was $238, and my final balance is $5,006, right? Until we get to the required amount. Now, The other thing I can show you is we can actually print this out while we're doing this. So let's do set width 20, interest, well, I'll just print out the interest, and then set width of 20, balance. So what this is going to do, it's actually going to do the calculation and print the information at each iteration, and then it'll print out the last value with at the last after we break out of the loop. So if we take this and compile it, if I do an initial deposit of 200, see all the iterations that we did. Okay, now why is it printing this out now? It's printing this out because of this cout statement within my while loop. So it does a calculation and then I print out the value. So on the first iteration, okay, on the first iteration, I have a value interest of 10 and a balance of 210. Okay. On the next iteration, I have an interest value of $10.50 and a balance of $220.50. Okay, and so on. And as we go through each iteration, okay, we scroll all the way down. Okay, it will do it until I break out of the loop, and then finally, the last, this cout, which does not belong to this while loop, will print out the balance in the final interest after the fact. Okay, which I really, it depends on what your aim is. You don't have to do this because as you see, it actually printed it out twice. This one comes from the loop, and this one comes from the final cout statement. So I could probably make a final print out, and if I do that, I can execute and run this. So let's do 100. Okay, so here you see that the final printout is 22478007 and 5203. Okay, but because I have this cout statement within my body, it's going to print every iteration. Okay, it's going to print every iteration. So again, the concept is real simple. You have an expression here, and it will iterate to the body once as long as this is true. So if this is true, iterate, if this is true, execute the body, and then go back up and do a check again. If it's true, execute the body, then go back and do a check again. So the important thing to realize is that one, you don't want to get caught in an infinite loop. And how do you not get caught in an infinite loop? Well, you have to make sure that eventually something in your body will cause this variable here, this actual variable, to convert this expression into a false value. And we have that here because eventually balance will be greater than 5,000. Okay, it's not going to be less than 5,000 forever. Okay, it's not going to be less than 5,000 forever. And because of that, we're guaranteed that this eventually will break out, because eventually, once it gets over 5,000, it will return, it would say it's a false, and then we'll go to the next line. Okay, so you have to be careful when you are actually doing your while loop to make sure that you have some type of control variable. Let me give you another example. Okay, we won't use this program. We use something a little bit simpler, which I can show you. Okay, int count is equal to 1. So if we look at this example, count is really our control variable here. Why? Because we're trying to control how many iterations we're going to actually go through. So when count is actually greater than 10, okay, when it's greater than 10, it's going to break out of the loop. As long as it's less than or equal to 10, then it's going to stay in this loop and execute these statements one by one. And I have to make sure to increment count somewhere in my body, because if I don't, if I don't increment count somewhere in my body, then it's going to go on forever because it's going to say, is 1 less than or equal to 10, is 1 less than or equal to 10, is 1 less than or equal to 10, and so on. So this is what I mean by having some type of control variable. So you have to make sure that when you have a while loop, you have a control variable here that will eventually change its value, okay, somewhere in the body. And not only will it change its value, it will satisfy a false condition for this expression, okay? Because if you satisfy the false condition, then that means that it'll eventually break out of the loop. Okay, it'll eventually break out of the loop. Okay, so this for 10 times, because we're using a postfix increment, for 10 times it's going to iterate. Okay, so if I compile and run, you see that? It's going to print out set width and then count. It increments by 1, set width, then count 2, 3, 4, and eventually gets to 10. And then when it gets to 10, right, it's going to print out the number 10 because 10 is less than or equal to 10. Then it'll increment to 11, okay? If we go back and check, 11 is less than or equal to 10? No, it's not. So it's going to break out. But the funny thing, the thing you got to realize is that you have to know that count will not reinitialize its value. So you're going to keep the value of count as it is and what it was within this loop, okay? So if I was going to do a cout value of count, you will see that it's actually 11. Okay, it's actually 11. Because that 11 is what it took for us to break out of the loop. It turned into an 11, right? So value of count is 11. Okay? So it's going to keep track. It's not going to erase whatever you did here. So make sure that you realize that when you are having a control variable here or something to indicate that it's going to break out of the loop, the value is going to continue to be the same as it was when it broke out of the loop. Okay. Now the other thing is, with a loop, you should always have open parentheses and open brackets, closed brackets. This indicates that it's in the body of a loop. And within the while loop, you can have any C++ statements that you wish. You can have a cout, you can have a cin, you could have a while loop within there. You can even have a do loop. And then when you learn for loops, you can also have a for loop within there. So anything's game within the body of a while loop. The only thing that's not game here is that when you talk about this expression, you just have to make sure that this expression is going to evaluate to a true or a false. Okay, so you can have a mix of relational operators, logical operators, even some type of mathematical operators if you want to do some math in there, as long as the final expression will give you a true or false result. Okay, it's got to be a Boolean expression. Okay, and that's it for the while loop. It's pretty simple. I would suggest you follow my examples here, and you may want to check me out some more examples at www.parttimemagic.com. I have some exercises up there that you can do, or you can even email me at parttimemagic@gmail.com. Thanks. Happy programming.